After 2 years, the first film of Phase 4 of the MCU, Black Widow, is about to hit theaters. So let's talk about it. Black Widow picks up after the events of Captain America's Civil War and has the title character reuniting with her family from before the Avengers to stop a threat. As a massive fan of the MCU, I'm always excited for new releases. But because this is the first movie of Phase 4, kind of adds an extra layer of anticipation for the film. And then on top of that, it was delayed a year, so we had 2 years between MCU films, which adds an extra layer of anticipation on top of that. So naturally, I was very excited to watch this film. Now I'm very excited to talk about it, so let's talk about the good. And the first thing that comes to mind here is that this is very much a personal rather than global story. Phase 3 told a lot of stories with cosmic beings and aliens. There were these massive threats that posed an imminent and urgent threat to a planet, a city, or the entire galaxy. By comparison, this is a much smaller story. The stakes, the consequences are personal to Natasha and the characters that are allies with her. The villain doesn't have some master plan for what they're trying to do in the future that our characters have found out about that they need to stop before something happens. It's a different type of story, but still, you deeply care about making sure they're successful on their mission because you care about the lead characters. Next thing you gotta talk about with this movie is the action, and it is brutal. Some of it's highly stylized, cool flippy kick stuff, but all shot in a way where you can see what's taking place. Other times, it's just all out brawls with people being smashed into walls and things being smashed into people's heads. All of it is exciting and well done. Along those same lines, it has a more mature tone than most MCU films. There's a lot of darker elements inside of the story. The nature of the relationships are significantly more complex. And I think it's just a movie that's aiming for a slightly higher age range than most MCU films. Like, my kids are getting old enough that they're starting to watch some of the MCU films with us. And as I was watching this film, I was thinking, there's a lot of stuff I would need to explain to my kids because I don't think they would naturally put together what exactly is happening. And I say that entirely as a positive. They're telling a story that requires a little bit more of the audience and isn't so simplistic in the dynamics. Along those same lines, the cast here has great chemistry. In particular, Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh just are a lot of fun to watch on screen as these two girls that were very much sisters in a certain sense, and they have very different personalities. They've had very different experiences throughout the years, and it creates a real fun dynamic between the characters. But the whole family, when they're together, is a lot of fun, especially just seeing their different perspectives on the family unit, how they interpret what their relationship and dynamic was and currently is. The two standouts in the movie are Florence Pugh and David Harbour. Both of their characters are just so lively and fun in very different ways. Florence Pugh's character, it just kind of has this way of sense of humor about her that feels like someone that you would know, that just happens to also be a world-class assassin, but she's just dropping all of these very relatable, organic sorts of lines. And then David Harbour is sort of this Russian Captain America who's a very simplistic person. His interpretation of what his purpose is, the dynamic of the family, his relationship to the government, it's very one-dimensional, and that's what makes him so much fun because he's just a real simple guy with a lot of bravado to him. And so the two of them steal almost every scene they're in. Sometimes they're in scenes together, which is doubly fun. Continuing on that, the humor worked a lot better than I was expecting, largely because the first 25 minutes, not a lot of humor in there. It's actually pretty dark, but then once you get Florence Pugh, David Harbour on screen, their characters bring so much energy, but it feels natural to who their characters are rather than just kind of full-blown setups and punchlines that it actually, most all of it landed, and it used the humor at the right moments. It didn't feel like they were undercutting the drama and the tension by feeling the need to throw jokes in. As I mentioned before, the first 20-25 minutes is pretty dark, and it doesn't undercut that with humor, but then when you have characters that are lively and it's appropriate to have humor, that's when the humor is involved. And there's even some sequences where like the family's together and it starts humorous with a lot of banter, but then it transitions to something more dramatic as they start being more and more vulnerable and more things are said. And it does it in a way where it can still have a little humor at the back end without undermining the proper emotion of the sequence. All in all, it's another solid MCU film, this one telling a smaller story about this family of Russian assassins. It's not trying to swing for the fences. It's not trying to be the next Endgame. It knows it's a smaller story, and I think it stays in its lane well and delivers what you want from a Black Widow story like this. And I think one of the things it does really nicely is that it actually makes her fate in Endgame even more emotional and a little bit sadder. From there, let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And when it comes to this, these aren't necessarily good or bad things. They're just things to know before you go into it. And as I've been alluding to throughout this entire review, this is not an MCU film for younger viewers. It is more mature in the story, the relationships, the complexity. When you start getting into the Red Room and the Black Widow training and everything involved in that, it's really dark, heavy stuff, much darker than most MCU films, and it kind of saturates the whole movie. It drives the plot line, the motivation of our heroes, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to stop. All of it goes back to just the pure cruelty that the villains are doing on these people. Even some of the humor is more mature. This movie pushes that PG-13 boundary more so than most MCU films. From there, let's move on to the bad. And the big thing here is that it's just very strange that they decided to tell this story to kick off Phase 4. Maybe it would have played a little bit better when the movie was supposed to come out a year ago as maybe like a palate cleanser after the world-ending stakes of Endgame. But after a 2-year gap, the audience wants to move forward, not go backward. And this feels like they had just kind of found a script for a movie that was supposed to come out in fall of 2016 and just went, all right, let's go ahead and do this. It gives us some more information about Black Widow and her backstory, but it doesn't do anything to really reframe our understanding of who she is or where she was at the beginning of Infinity War, or reframing the events of the world of the MCU at that point in time, nor does it do anything to lay a bunch of foundation and groundwork for the future of the MCU. It's just a story about Black Widow from 5 years ago. None of this makes the movie bad. It just makes it feel inconsequential and underwhelming after waiting 2 years. Another problem here is that Black Widow felt like the least interesting character in her own movie. Now, don't get me wrong, ScarJo is obviously great in the role. She's great at the action. She can pull off the emotional elements, and she can be fun and have chemistry with her cast members. But Natasha as a character has never been this vibrant, charismatic personality. And so then when you bring in Yelena and Red Guardian, who are these charismatic, funny characters, they naturally stand out a little bit more than her. Likewise, because this movie is sandwiched between Civil War and Infinity War, and Black Widow didn't dramatically change between these two films besides her hair color, there's just not a lot to do with the character to give her a big arc to transform her. Therefore, everyone else kind of gets the character arcs, interesting backstories, complexities to them. ScarJo didn't do anything wrong. She's still enjoyable in the movie, but everyone else kind of stands out a little bit more in front of her. And finally, Taskmaster was pretty underwhelming for me. Now, in the action sequences, there's a lot of cool stuff that happened because of Taskmaster's abilities, and there's some twists, turns, and reveals that fit into the story that's being told, but I think the trailers oversold the character a little bit, which kind of led to some expectations of there being a little bit more to it than there actually was. When you put it all together, I think the biggest thing working against this film is the audience's expectations. We've been waiting 2 years for more MCU. We're waiting for more of that 2019 MCU energy, but MCU 2019 was what they spent 10 years building up to. This movie's not meant to live up to 2 years worth of anticipation for a new MCU film. It's just supposed to be the next MCU film, a fun spy movie in the MCU. You have to go in with that as your level of expectation. Real quick before I give you my final score, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your level of anticipation for this film. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a ton of other MCU content. You can check it out right up here in this playlist. I even did a video with my buddy Andy where we discussed the comic book origins of the Taskmaster. So if you want to learn more about Taskmaster before seeing the movie, check that video out right up here. Black Widow is a solid MCU film with smaller stakes and a more personal story. Certainly, it would have made way more sense to release this movie 5 years ago, but despite their weird timing, I enjoyed the film. Overall, it's a B+ on the entertainment scale and 8.5. MCU fans should definitely check this one out. If you want more MCU content, you can see my rankings right over there. You can see that video on the Taskmaster right down there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.